you were talking earlier about the new wave of American heavy metal and that whole New England sound and I think and if I could be wrong, but I do think that that might be the last like geographical music scene that kind of popped off so big, like the Seattle scene, things like that. Because I remember being late 90s, early 2000s, starting to get Killswitch and Unearth and Shadows Fall and all that stuff kind of coming in. And it was funny because, like I said, I grew up listening to Megadeth, Metallica, whatnot, but kind of then I got into the more Korn and the new metal stuff. And then I remember hearing the Oncoming Storm by Unearth, and I'm like, oh, guitar solos are coming back. And then that whole scene kind of blows up, man. And just kind of talk about being in the middle of it. I mean, obviously, original Shadows Fall vocalist, and you see all your friends your bands are popping off all around you. It's crazy.
So it was one of the weird things was in the 90s when Korn came out, like they had a massive impact. Clearly, I mean that's obvious. But I don't know if people today understand exactly how impactful Korn was back then. Like when they hit, metal bands that were riff heavy metal bands, they were like, well, that's a new kind of heavy.
Yeah.
And it was something that people wanted to emulate. And without Korn, I don't think you get deathcore bands that you have today. Like I think that they had a really, really strong influence on what it meant to make heavy music and what was heavy, right? Like the breakdowny downbeat stuff. There was some of that stuff in death metal before Korn and in metal before Korn, but Korn really brought that kind of out. And I don't even know that you would have metalcore breakdowns that you do without bands like Korn. I'm not sure. Maybe you would, but I'm not sure. But one of the things that did happen is like when I was in a band that was playing death metal and they were like, we want to start doing that kind of stuff. And so I was like, no, I was like, I don't want it. I was like, I want to play metal, like regular, like thrashy. Cause I even still like, I'm into, I mean, if you listen to All That Remains isn't a breakdown band, right? We're a riff band. And that's kind of the way that I've always been. Like, I like heavy riffs and I do like breakdowns, but our breakdowns aren't like, they're not the super, super chuggy, and we don't rely on the breakdown, right? Like the breakdown isn't what All That Remains is about. All That Remains, if you look at All That Remains, we're a band that's mostly about choruses, not about riffs, not about breakdowns. But when Korn hit the scene and music really changed, for me, I was looking for the European stuff, I guess. And that's when I saw Shadows Fall. And I was like, that's the kind of stuff that I want to do. And so that I got into the band because they had, I think they had a singer that did a couple shows. I think Damien did like 3 or something like that. But they had what I was looking for because I wanted that kind of riff stuff, like the European feel. And it wasn't just, obviously it wasn't just me, but they were the first guys that I heard that were doing it. And then I heard an Aftershock started doing it too, because John Donne from Shadows Fall, he played an Aftershock, which was a band that had Adam Duckowitz, and it had Toby Duckowitz, the singer, was singing. They had a bunch of different bass players come through. And then Joel, who plays in Killswitch, joined Aftershock in the later years of their existence. But John Donne was an Aftershock at first. And that was one, like those guys were the kind of the catalyst for the sound. So like Matt Bichon, who was in a band called Exhumed, he linked up with John Donne and they started Shadows Fall. And so and I knew Matt pretty well. And so that's how I got into that band. But all those guys were like, they all kind of came from the same 7 or 8 dudes, I think, kind of in Western Mass that really started it, because the guys in Unearth, they were really friendly with Adam as well. And he was producing their stuff and working with them. And so that was the influence. But I think that the new wave of American heavy metal, a good portion of it can be accredited to Adam D himself, which I think most people kind of know, but he's really he was the kind of the focal point of it for at least out of Western Mass.
Yeah, I think Adam was kind of the secret weapon and all that, being able to write and produce and get those sounds. And, it's almost one of those deals where if you see that he produced a record, you're like, I got to check that out. He kind of has
Yeah.
that J with the name.
Yeah. In New England, there was a lot of people that were trying to do something similar or that were on the same page musically. We all kind of were like, because we were all vibing to the same bands and we were all hanging out at the same time. So like, we'd all go to the same shows. So we'd all see each other. We'd all hang out when we could and stuff. So we were all on the same page and trying to figure out where we fit best with which bands were going to be, who was going to be in what bands and stuff. I mean, me and Joel were trying to get each other to join each other's bands. Like when All That Remains was starting, I was trying to get Joel to come play guitar in All That Remains, and Joel was trying to get me to go play guitar in Killswitch because I'd played guitar with Joel and Adam in Aftershock for a little while. Adam was playing drums, I'm playing guitar, Joel's playing, so there was all the dudes were all hanging out in the same band. So it was just figuring out where we were going to land. But Adam was really kind of the guy that, because he went to Berkeley and he went to school for it. So he kind of was the guy that kind of was like, hey guys, I kind of know how to make records. So let me go ahead and make your records for you because I know what I'm doing. And we were like, sick. It was kind of that simple up there,
How wild is it, just on a side note, how wild is it to see John Dene like in Anthrax? Like, I mean, obviously growing up a metal fan, you're like, dude, I know that guy and he's now in Anthrax. And even Jason Bittner, I don't know how close you are with him, but even with him being in, so many thrash metal bands too.
Yeah. It is cool to think of just the fact that like, there's so many of us from like Western Mass that like, we did it. It's kind of the way that it looks. It's like we managed to make a career in the music industry. And more than that, we actually, we can look back and say, hey, like, I mean, not that All That Remains doesn't have, like, we've got a future ahead of us. We got a great record, but it is cool to be able to look back and be like, hey man, I had my hand in making something cool. And I think you might be right. Like that might be the last time that there's ever a regional thing musically because of the internet and how people connect with music and stuff. So it might be a cool little part of music history that I got to be a part of.